Hello, I'm Pastor Paul. Welcome to the Lord of Life Lutheran Church Sermon Podcast. We're glad you're here. We know that you can't always be in worship with us, so we're glad to provide the sermons from our weekly services. We hope that you will find hope and inspiration as we have in Jesus Christ. And now, here's this week's message. The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 24th chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you, while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the third day rise again." Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb, stooping and looking in. He saw the linen cloths by themselves. Then he went home, amazed at what had happened. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
You may be seated. Grace and peace to you from God, our Creator, and from Jesus, the resurrected Son of God. Amen. As a challenge for some of you to stay focused today, I offer you this. Count how many times you hear the word remember. Not variations of it, but just the word remember. All right? Are you up for the challenge? I know some of our youth will be, because they're awesome at counting like that. Let's start it this way. Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed. Alleluia.
There you go. It's a great day, isn't it? It is Easter Sunday. Praise God. I hear those words, Christ is risen indeed, and they stir memories in me. Do they in you? I remember hearing the pastor say those words when I was a child growing up. It makes me think about the smell of Easter flowers. Did you smell the flowers yet? They're beautiful. About Easter breakfasts, when I was a youth director and I had to be up way before dawn to start cooking. Thank you to John. I see you back there. Good job this morning. And I have a lot of memories about getting really dressed up as a child for Easter. Like those funny little suits and stuff that they have at the store, right? And I remember family and food and Easter egg hunts. And here's a top tip for you. Remember where you put all of the eggs outside so that you don't find one of them in July while you're mowing the lawn. It's happened. Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed. Alleluia.
Human memory is a strange thing. Why is it that there are some things that are memorable and then there's some things that are not? Why can I sing along with a song on the radio from 20 years ago? This happened yesterday, by the way. But I can't remember my brother's birthday. I looked it up. It's this weekend. I need to call him. Why is it that I can remember exactly how to get to a particular department in the grocery store, but when I get there, I can't remember what it is that I was supposed to get? And when I was in the car getting ready to go into the store, I'm like, I got this list in my head. No problem. It's only 3 things. But I'm lost when I'm there. Sometimes I come home from the store and Larice will say, "Did you pick up the bread?" Oh. I did get a donut. And they had Gatorade on sale. So. Memory is a strange thing, and it plays an important role in our gospel message for today. It was the first day of the week, early in the morning, when a group of women went to the tomb. Note that it is a group of women that God entrusts with this amazing news. Followers of Jesus. They're carrying spices with them to finish the embalming process for their teacher, for their Lord, for Jesus. When they arrive, they find the tomb open, the stone is rolled away, and Jesus' body is missing. And then suddenly 2 strangers appeared to them. They had a glow about them. Literally, if we translated the words from the Bible, it would say that they gleamed like lightning. Isn't that a neat way to say it? They gleamed like lightning. The women immediately dropped to the ground, covering their faces, and the 2 strangers said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He is risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you that on the 3rd day he would be raised again." Then the women remembered his words. I've read the account of Jesus' resurrection, I don't even know, hundreds if not thousands of times, and I've heard them even more from my childhood through today. This week, as I talked with a pastor friend of mine, he helped me to really think about this text in a new way. He noticed something that I'd never really paid attention to before. The angels aren't just telling the women that Jesus has risen. Of course, they're saying that, but if we pay close attention, we may see that there's something very subtle in the words of the angels. The angels say, "Remember how he told you that he would be crucified and on the 3rd day be raised again." The angels said, "Remember," as in, remember what he said? Do you remember what he told you? And I think the angels are maybe just a little bit rebuking these women. The tone feels more like what I used to say to my son. "Remember that when I told you that throwing the baseball in the house was a bad idea? Remember that? Go get the dustpan." And if we're honest, this is really a way of us saying, "I told you so," right? So are these angels saying, "I told you so"? I don't know. How the angels say what they say to the women sounds a little bit like that. Remember when Jesus told you this was going to happen? So why are you here? Duh, Jesus told you. Not going to be here. Remember? These women, and I'm guessing the rest of the disciples as well, didn't remember. They had lost track of what Jesus had said to them, what Jesus had promised them, really. Which is a little surprising. If you had spent 3 years following someone, living with them and learning from them, and that person had mentioned to you that they were going to die, but hey, it's okay, because I'm going to come back in 3 days from the dead, and I'll be alive again. You might remember them saying that, right? It's radical and different enough that it might be worth remembering. But the disciples forget. And to be honest, we all forget. I mean, most of us have heard the story of Jesus at some point in our lives. We remember it, but sometimes I think we forget that it really happened. And we forget that it isn't just a historical act. It is a personal act for each and every one of us. We forget that it has meaning. So let's remember together, shall we? Remember that Jesus stood in front of the temple in Jerusalem. It was a massive, gleaming brick and stone and gold house of God. And Jesus said, "Destroy this temple, and I will rebuild it in 3 days." The religious leaders say, "How are you going to do that? It took us 46 years to put this thing together." But Jesus wasn't talking about the temple. He was talking about himself. He was basically saying, "I'm going to be killed." That's where this is all headed. And after all, you don't confront corrupt and power-driven systems without paying a price. Sometimes the price is your life. So Jesus is headed to his execution, and he knows it. Theologian and author Rob Bell says, "If you had witnessed this divine life being extinguished on a cross, how would you not be overwhelmed with despair? Does death have the last word?" He continues, if that's the case, then despair is the only reasonable response. It's easy to be cynical, but Jesus says, "Destroy this temple and I will rebuild it." He says that his execution would not be the end. He says that something new and unexpected would happen after his death. He's talking about resurrection. Resurrection announces that God has not given up on the world because the world matters. This world, the one that we live in, that you and I occupy, the world that God is redeeming and restoring and renewing. Greed and violence and abuse, they have no right here. They cannot last because they belong to death. And death, Jesus is saying, does not belong. Resurrection says that what we do with our lives matters. So every act of compassion matters. Every work of art that celebrates the good and what is true matters. Every fair and honest act of business matters. Every kind word, they all belong and they all will go on in God's world. Nothing will be forgotten. Everything has its place. Jesus invites us to believe in, to trust in the resurrection. Jesus says that he would die and be resurrected at least 3 different times in this gospel, but we forget. We may not forget the promises here, right? But we forget them in our hearts. We forget to believe that they are real for us. Losing our memory of these things has huge implications for us when we sit in front of a big pile of bills and we aren't quite sure how we're going to pay them all. We don't know which one gets priority of the other one, and we have to delay some, and we despair. We forget that Jesus says, I am with you in the hard times. When we sit across from a doctor and we receive a diagnosis that we've been fearing, and we despair, and we forget the promise that Jesus is with us and that Jesus heals sometimes our bodies, but every time our spirits. When a relationship we care about is broken and we're not sure how it can be repaired, we despair. But in those moments we've forgotten that Jesus is right there in the middle of that relationship, drawing people together. And while restoration may not always be possible, grace is. When you've done something, hurt someone, disappointed someone, and you feel incredible guilt and pain, and it's almost enough to overwhelm you, you have forgotten that Jesus forgives unconditionally. Like those women at the tomb that morning who knew Jesus, who spoke with him, we too forget that when Jesus promised resurrection, Jesus meant it. There are days that we forget. Why do we rehearse this story again and again every year? Because we need to be reminded. I need to be reminded every year, every month, every week, every day that Jesus is alive. We all need to be reminded that the resurrection was more than an event 2,000 years ago. The resurrection fulfills promises and brings life today, tomorrow, and the rest of our lives. We need to be reminded here in our hearts that Jesus is alive and changes everything. That no matter how separated we feel from God or from each other, there is grace for you. Enough grace, more than enough grace. You need to remember that resurrection always overcomes death. Every single time. For Jesus and for you. Remembering is hard. I hope that you will hold tight to these promises. I hope that you will remember how much Jesus loves you today and for the rest of your life. Because Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed. Alleluia.
Remember. Thanks be to God. Amen. And if you were counting, 27.
Thanks for listening to the Lord of Life Lutheran Church Sermon Podcast. If you're ever in the Dubuque-land area, please join us for worship. Visit our website at www.lordoflife.online to learn more about service times and about our vision for serving God and our community. God bless you.